Well, our next session is on technology and security solutions. So we'll talk about bank payment systems, building technology and transparency in unbanked category, along with innovative security solutions, the need of the hour, and of course we'd like to make it as engaging as possible. Our session moderator, let's put our hands together as I welcome her on stage, Ms. Hema Jagtiani, Associate Director, Ernst & Young. Let's put our hands together and welcome her. As a part of our panel discussion, we have with us Ms. Ramaswamy Venkatatalam, Country Manager, India, FIS. Thank you for joining us, our partners as well for the day. We'd also like to welcome on stage Sanjeev Ashria, Founder and Managing Director, SmartChip. A warm welcome to Ms. Ravindra Rao, Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer, Fulton India. I'm sure the lunch was delicious and all of us have the energy to really put our hands together for the panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you to our panelists and our moderator. Of course, after the interaction and the debate amongst them all, we'd like to open the house for question and answers. You're most welcome to be a part of that. May I now hand over the proceedings to Hema as we await the rest of our panelists to join us on stage. Hema, why don't you start with an introduction till then meanwhile?
Very good afternoon. I'm Hema Jagtiani. I lead the payments focus area within Ernst & Young. I've got today with me Sanjeev from SmartChip. I've got Ramaswamy from FIS, and I've also got Ravindran from Fullerton. We are here today to talk about the payments technology and security aspects around financial inclusion. The focus from banks, NBFCs, and how technology as an enabler will facilitate driving mission mode critical policy agendas for financial inclusion. I'm sure we all are aware about the Prime Minister's Jan Dhan program, and we're talking about 7.5 crore households being now financially included. In a country wherein 24 crore households exist, only I would say 14 crores are currently banked. More than 10 crores are currently unbanked, which means that in rural we have as high as 40% financially excluded, and in the urban areas we have as high as 30%, more than 30% financially exclusion. So banks and NBFCs, MFIs, and now payments banks as well in the next few years will be driving financial inclusion. The key is to essentially understand how these initiatives will make a difference in the next few years and how will we essentially achieve this roadmap for financial inclusion. That as a context, let me start by understanding what are the key challenges that currently the service providers in terms of banks, MFIs and NBFCs are witnessing in terms of achieving financial inclusion. Let me ask Ravindra to share some insights from an NBFC stroke banking perspective. What are the challenges that they've been witnessing in the last few years in terms of last mile delivery and banking the unbanked?
Okay. The growing mantra today is to get into the underbanked, and that's where you have this concept that is coming right now of late, which is urban, which is more a mix of more of rural and then urban categories. And the reality is that everybody is going to the rural areas. So if that is the situation, technology can only at best partner the business needs and the requirements. A standalone, the best thing the tech guy can do is to give you a solution and say, here is the solution now, go and deliver. But that's not how it is, because at the end of the day, technology also works on a certain platform, But before that, I want to take a step back to see how much of it is, and let me state this, how much of it is lip service versus how much of it is really pertaining to investments that one needs to do in technology. We all know that the technology models available today, you can have a CapEx and an OpEx model, but the reality is that it's more of a business decision to decide how much and when to invest in technology. Now, the imminent challenges that one would see in the rural areas, when you're looking at, say for example, a mobile banking, there is always a kind of a deadlock which continues to exist between the mobile operators and the banks. And that is the time, that is the space probably where the regulators will have to step in big time to kind of smoothen this particular embargo that gets created. So that's one of the reasons why it has not taken off to the extent that we think it is appropriate enough to take off. That's number one. The second of all is the pure availability of links, because some of us do go to the private internet service providers for links, because each time you are encountering with flapping of networks, the links are sometimes down, you need to go for some redundancy plans, you need to look at some kind of a backup arrangement to make this technology even more smooth. Because please understand, the people in the rural areas, and it comes back to the point that we discussed in the morning, which is around financial literacy. You need to be even technologically savvy in terms of operating not just on a smartphone but also on a normal handset that the rural household or a rural educated male or a female were to use. So that is one important challenge that we need to see in terms of the linkage, because if the so-called toy doesn't work, there is no confidence in the person using it anymore. Thirdly, we discussed about the availability or the lack of it of e-commerce in the rural areas, because you don't have too much amount of point of sale terminals which are available in the rural outlets for you to really use your RuPay card, and that, while it's a great initiative, you need to have a very strong back-end machinery again to take care of the equipment, the link. There should be opportunity for service outlets as far as the hard infrastructure is concerned. All of that poses a challenge in itself. But having said all this, we haven't really explored the angle around information security, which according to me is a very big challenge that all of us are countering, because ultimately, end of the day, your transactions need to be secure. They need to kind of execute at a lightning fast pace. Otherwise, as I said before, you will lose confidence as far as that particular equipment is concerned. Thirdly, the availability of customer information, and you have your own privacy laws. The regulations are very tight as far as any potential breaches are concerned, because you're housing a customer confidentiality, you're holding his information. How are you ensuring that it is so secure? So it's just not about technology, it's a question about how much you want to invest in InfoSec. And that is, I think, the most crucial part of this entire debate, according to me. It's just not available of technology, but how safe and secure that particular information is. Because I can get endlessly, you can have phishing sites. How do you transmit money? You will have internet frauds. But the last thing that you want in this entire initiative is some kind of a loose rivet somewhere, which would kind of throw the entire thing out of spin. So Hema, essentially the challenges, according to me, the top challenges where we would tend to lose sleep are at these, while we would want to get into the rural areas, but one needs to be careful while mentioning what the back-end technology infra has to be very, very strong.
Sure. Thank you. So I guess Ravindra shared with us a very important point around, I would say, information security, which each one of us are very, very critical about in terms of the enabling technology which will make us feel more secure in terms of delivering the last mile. But what is equally important is that last mile farmer or the rural household should feel secure that their money is indeed in safe hands. And how do we build that? It's a journey. We start that journey with mobile vans, different branch forms. We start the journey with technology partnerships, telecom partnerships, mobile banking, Aadhaar-enabled payment systems, and mobile wallets, right? A lot has been done, but I guess we're still not there completely in terms of winning that trust and building an ecosystem which will help us deliver that. On that front, from your perspective, Ramaswamy, would you want to add how technology would play an enabler in the entire journey for financial inclusion?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ravi. I think you brought up some important aspects that I was also mulling over when I was having lunch. I mean, the way I was constructing the problem in my head, and like somebody said this morning, financial inclusion has been around for, I think, a couple of decades now, but in terms of its offtake and how successful it's been, I think it's really the intersect of two aspects, a 2x2 matrix as I like to call it. So on the consumer side, it is really, I think, access and reliability. So access in the sense, you're going to have a farmer or a day wage worker trying to go out and find out where is the nearest access point for him to bank. So, or somebody who has a peripatetic job like a taxi driver or somebody who's a courier boy. So all of these people have, in the nature of their duties, an inability to go out and find a fixed brick and mortar branch with whom they'd like to bank. So when we talk a lot about the unbanked and the underbanked, a lot of them belong to this category. They just don't have time as part of their day jobs to go and access banking services. So access at the point at which this last mile person, a farmer in the rural fields, or somebody in an urban area that has challenges getting to a bank branch at the time the bank operates, is really one aspect. The second is the reliability. So when I go to a particular point of operation, it needs to work. It can't be closed, it can't be open. One of the reasons for the massive success of ATMs today is because it's 24/7, it's there, it's accessible. So that's the consumer angle. So the challenge on the stakeholder side, be it the banking institutions, financial, NBFCs, MFIs, I think they have a slightly different challenge. One is, how do you make all of this, yes, we are going to acquire this large base of customers, but how do we make it efficient? Does it then mean I need 5 more departments to manage this new, body of customers I'm getting because it's non-traditional? So efficiency needs to be there. How does all of this happen? Is it straight through? Is it going to be automated? And the cost, probably the most important aspect. So if you look at the sort of the interconnect between these two, the consumers have their own challenges, the banks have their own challenges. So that's where I think people like us come into play. I'll pick an anecdote. About 5 or 6 years ago, when we were rolling out ATMs, and we roll out a lot of ATMs across India for all public sector banks, one of the challenges we noticed was, people get intimidated depending on the way you construct the ATM lobby itself. It's not very different from a lot of people not going to walk into a 5-star hotel just because they're intimidated by it. So you have to make access to a lot of these areas a lot more simpler, be it the screen functionality. And you have seen over the last 5 or 6 years how much the regulation has changed, how much banks are now demanding, saying make the ATMs talk to us, make them print receipts in a language I understand, make them disabled friendly, give us ramps. So all of these are, I think, approaches to making technology more accessible, because that's the only way. I mean, literacy is a challenge. We're talking about phones, right? But at the end of the day, 90% of these people don't even know how to properly authenticate themselves. So you give them a RuPay card, are they going to remember the PIN? Unlikely. So without being a pessimist, I'm trying to say that for us, the challenge is how do you really dumb it down and make it simple yet safe, to your point. Is biometric the answer? Is UID? Is real-time authentication? Is real-time eKYC the answer? We don't know yet, but certainly these are the proof points or the points in the journey that we will take towards achieving some of those goals. So that's how I'd like to respond, saying, what are we like service providers going to do to enable that? This is something that we will discover. We have some ideas, but we have some more steps to take.
Keeping in mind, technology indeed will have a very critical role to play, and Ramaswamy, you touched upon some points in security, right, whether biometric or chip and pin, or keeping in mind that the rural customer obviously is not literate. He, in terms of using mobile phones, he's possibly just using it as a purpose of communication. But for him to actually authenticate himself beyond a fingerprint could be a challenge. Will he really remember that PIN to actually use that card? And how will he use that card at a micro ATM or at a BC or any other mobile POS terminal. There is, I would say, humongous amount of education, awareness, training that needs to go into the entire process to make this entire process seamless, intuitive and simple. And that's where, while security will be a key concern, the simplicity has to drive the entire pace in terms of adoption. So from a security perspective, Sanjeev, what are your thoughts in terms of having seen Aadhaar-enabled payment systems and being a part of UID and several other national programs and you being at the forefront of security? What are your experiences in terms of customer adoption and as well as adoption from the banking industry to facilitate a financial transaction with due respect to some of the RBI norms around chip and PIN and biometric standards?
Sure. Well, no, actually speaking, I think over the years we have resolved one problem that without technology we will not be able to deliver. So that's one thing out of the way. People want technology and they believe that good technology will be is a mandate, is important to deliver if we want to reach the villager at low cost, simple transactions in a friendly way with access, all of that. The problem has been, this is my experience in the last 15 years of dealing with financial inclusion, innings 1, 2 and 3 or whatever else, that I think the amount of effort that the banks and the ecosystem partners need to put together to design the technology framework has one very important element that has been missing, and that is interoperability. See, in a diverse context as India, I mean a big geography, and let's say different stakeholders, if you start to deal with this problem, if all the banks, the 26 PSUs, and today they deal with this problem independently, so there is no forum where they can get together and say, okay, let's deal with this problem together and say, okay, what should work in what way. The problem is the same, but they need to agree. So what is happening is, over time, we have created islands of technology. So there are all kinds of technology that are operating out there. All of them, some good, some bad, some secure, some insecure. Rarely do banks call the technologists and ask. They ask the price, but they don't ask, is it secure? So nobody asks, what are the security breaches? What are the risks? What are the certifications? Is there a global standard? So they say, no, we have a, some kind of a specification that has been released by somebody. Are you compliant? Fine. But is there a compliance agency in India? I mean, today, there is yet to be a lab that says that a micro ATM is micro ATM certified by XYZ. The sensor is certified by STQC, thanks for Aadhaar certification, but the terminal is not. So I can still have a micro ATM compliant, means the vendor certifies that I am compliant to that technology, but there is no certification body. And this is not a unique problem. This is a problem that is generally pervading the technology aspect of all. See, the back-end side has been well secured in India due to the fact that there were few large responsible vendors who set the back-end in order. And if you see all the public sector banks, there are 3 or 4 or 5 large players who have installed systems which are generally at the cutting edge of technology and security. But the ecosystem out there, the last mile, is completely different. So you have all kinds of people delivering all kinds of solutions which are, I think, still craving even the basic appreciation of the question of security and of course ease of use and technology. These are all equally important, or I would say, yes, very important. So on the security aspect, now the question is, security has various connotations. Security of my information, fine. Security of the chip and PIN and biometrics, and these are all various parts. I mean, the question is today, the Aadhaar, if I lose my PIN, yes, I can get a new PIN. What happens if my biometrics is tampered with? Can I change my thumb? But who has asked this question of me? I don't think anybody asked me this question. Is my biometric secure? So today when there are no transactions yet in millions and millions in the field, the inevitable fraud has not occurred in any big proportion. But when there will be large transactions happening, large number of transactions, small value, large number of transactions, but for us it is small value, for the villager it is big value. You know, even a 400 rupee or a 100 rupee transaction is big value for a villager. And if his biometrics is compromised, if he loses his money, you know, we are doing some transactions on SMS. Come on, in this day and age, how much can we rely on an SMS which is unencrypted? I mean, we can create as many SMSs as we like, and one fine day we will have, you know, some risks and some fraud. I mean, fraud moves to the lowest, the weakest link in the chain. So I mean, I think we are not here sitting to discuss the threats and the risks. We are here to discuss that what is the importance that the ecosystem partners should give to the question of security. Now, interoperability, I think, is the twin side of the coin. Because if you do not have a standard which is complied with, then for each element, every new way to reach that solution, you have to verify, and that costs money. So when you have a standard and people comply to that, and then you have a certification process, then you can say, okay, I have solved this problem in this way, I have checked that this is secure, and so therefore if you are compliant to this, we are, you know, trusting the solution. So I think, Hema, you raised this question of trust. So my question today is that when will we test the trust? So the trust is coming in many ways. BCs today, and I am speaking out of turn from actually people who are out there in the field. I'm not in the field, but you know, there are implementations done by banks that are BCs visiting once a week, and you know, sometimes he comes and sometimes he doesn't come just because he's not paid. So I don't think that can generate a lot of trust to a customer in a village, since he doesn't see the same guy, and he has to look for a guy next time around whenever he would like to come. I mean, there are a number of questions, and this is an endless discussion.
So, thanks, Sanjeev. And I guess we are all grappling with a whole lot of challenges in the current scenario. But what is really critical is if for 7.5 crore households, say, if you're talking about 2 accounts per household, do we really have that delivery framework to actually be there and service the customer in the rural market? Sanjeev brought in a very important point, saying, is the BC really there, and he's possibly visiting there once a week. We did some deep down visits in Mysore where LPG was conducted in a very big way. The pilot of LPG in a very big way was conducted, and we actually found that 3 out of 10 locations the BC was really not there, and for more than 10 days at a stretch. So if you're talking about banking facilities being delivered with an extended arm of BCs, and then we're talking about CSCs and expanding the BC framework, I think what is critical is not to just open an account, but also be there to service the customer. Because yes, we all agree that account opening itself is very expensive. But even with several programs at the national front, if we've been able to open an account with some effort, are we really there to service that? Ravindra, that brings us to a very critical question about delivery framework, and how do you see delivery framework being equipped to handle customer enrollments and transactions deep down at the last mile?
Okay, let me just take a step back. You can have 2 accounts per household, you can have 4 accounts per household, but we just heard in the morning, if there is no money which gets channelized for more productive use, it is of no use to have about that many number of accounts, because what you will land up having is your number of dormant accounts in the banks will increase, your cost of operations will increase, because there's a maintenance cost which is involved, whether you like it or not, in every account. So if you want to even go into something, around say a tap and want to bring that solution to the rural areas, and assume for a moment that your technology is able to provide that solution, and my experience is that it does, because you have biometric, you can actually go into personal discussions, the verification channels can get opened up when you're not talking to the customer. The biometric will ideally connect to the database that can be shared with UIDAI. So all that flow of information can happen. And experts have stated that you can actually land up opening of accounts in about 5 minutes. It doesn't take so much more time because you're sitting there with the tab, you are talking to the customer, you're verifying the details of the customers, then you're assessing the details. And all this is possible because some of us who are involved in the rural lending space, we know it better because, see, in the urban space you have credit bureaus, so you can immediately get the details, enter the details, it will link to the credit bureaus, and then you will have your credit scores, and you can have a concept called approval in principle that you have in the urban areas. But in rural areas, the important part is the data. So your addresses will have to match because and such as the construct, you don't have that kind of minute pinpointing, to a certain house or to a certain locality. So technology will bring the solution in terms of getting into tap banking, where you are able to gauge the customer, you're able to open up an account faster, and also adopt the eKYC, so that you have a one-shop solution wherein it does a complete round, and then you can immediately have an account open. So technology does provide that particular solution. Some of us have used the technology even in terms of, as I talked about, the consumer lending space, wherein you don't have to, unfortunately you still have to have a customer sign an application form because that's a mandatory process. But they can also get, the way you sign when Blue Dart delivers something to you, you can also sign off on the, on the chip as well, wherein those signatures digital signatures are valid in a court of law today. So you can kind of open up accounts, and the technology, tap banking has been used by various banks and it has been successfully implemented. It is not very expensive, while of course, as I said, you have more and more scale, the cost of operations is that much, reduced. But the questions that I keep coming back to talk about it is that are we ready as yet for tap banking, because tap banking is just not opening up of accounts, but it will be used when you want to do any kind of consumer lending. So how much of that database is open from, your biometric will actually have to talk, extrapolating, I was just, hearing what you said, why do you need an ATM PIN? You can actually go and just put your biometric and that should itself be a PIN. Okay, so why do you actually need to remember a 4-digit or a 6-digit kind of an ATM PIN to start with? So that's the kind of a solution that technology can provide. But the question is, the solution which technology can provide, it's my personal experience, the solution that technology can provide is obviously determined by the level of understanding that the particular set of individuals have. When the users will have to understand the importance about it. We have not talked about, how can biometrics be, we're actually doing a new, thing to ponder. How can biometric data be compromised? And we all know that we are born with a unique.
So I've asked this question to Aadhaar, and I've been raising this for 1 year.
There's no proof point because it is.
No. See, today the point is that I lose my PIN, I can go back to the bank and say, I've lost my PIN. Can you give me a new PIN? So the loss is, so today the bank knows the PIN lost means I don't remember it, I've been logged out, somebody got it, he made a bad transaction, he took away my money, so I got a new PIN. So effectively they've replaced my 1, 2, 3, 4 with a 5, 6, 7, 8. Now let's say I use my biometrics and my biometrics gets compromised, because from the time I put my finger on the sensor up to the time it has to be encrypted there and then. And then if it gets compromised, what do I do? What do I do with this finger? So every database will have to say, okay, this finger of Sanjeev is compromised. So don't accept it.
Let me just throw a lighter moment on this, because there was a time when we were, we made a lot of progress in the rural areas as Fullerton. So what had happened was some of the customers in the rural areas came back to us and said the biometric doesn't work. Because when you do your group lending or your self-help group, your attendance is registered in the form of a biometric. So they said that it's not registering. So when we figured out that your poor farmer or
Manual labor.
if he's a late worker or anything of that sort, has a cut in the finger, and that's one of the reasons why the biometric does not register a fingerprint or kind of talk to our system. So we then immediately went on, being a risk manager before, I went on the other plan of having a redundancy. So we said, why don't you have the two fingers? You have a thumb and then you have another finger where you can register. So what happens if both the fingers are damaged? I have no answer to that.
But actually, Aadhaar fortunately is registering all the 10 and 2 eyes.
Correct.
So I mean, there are enough things to lose.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's in a lighter moment.
Ravindra, you spoke about the delivery framework. You spoke about we spoke about biometrics as well in a lighter moment. But the point really, for us to think from a technology perspective is that while we're talking about eKYC, we're talking about tap banking. Is the rural connectivity good enough to actually deliver or demonstrate those solutions and see their effectiveness? Have we tried that? And Ramaswamy, maybe you can add that. Have we tried using such solutions in the rural market?
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about our experience. We offer total outsource solution to a public sector bank, and we write pretty much all of the technology on this. And one of the challenges that we've had, and these are in regions where I think the impact of financial inclusion we felt the greatest. These are places like the Northeast, places like Jammu and Kashmir, where there are geographical challenges. I wouldn't say there are so much the issue of, can technology do something, can it not? There's always this price point versus, solution delivery mechanism and concentration. You go to a place like Ladakh, you want to offer certain services, the population there is extremely sparse, but you still want to offer these solutions. So it's always that challenge. Here is where, from technology company, have you tried it? We have tried, but it works very well when you're talking about very linear set of activities that you want to do. And probably the goal of financial inclusion, my personal opinion, should be to structure in a very defined manner, saying, okay, we will support, cash withdrawals, we will support, disbursals, acceptance of installments, and that's pretty much it. Anything else more complex, this is not the objective of what this last mile node is going to do, whoever that is, whether it's a business correspondent, a kirana, the last mile, service provider, telecoms, whoever that person is. Because then you're riding off of a network that's fairly reliable. Again, I'll go back to some of the payment systems that are there in this country, whether it's your POS systems or ATM systems, which tend to be the last mile, because ultimately cash has to come out of either a human being or a machine. These tend to run on very small bandwidth networks, and everybody is familiar with VSATs, and most of these places run on VSATs. Again, fairly secure networks. To your point about, are those last mile deliveries secure? They are. So if you can marry that somehow with ensuring simplicity, because I go back to that point about you give somebody a card, works in the field, doesn't remember his PIN, can biometric substitute that, is it reliable? While we'll park that question, this is possibly the way, if you have a very linear, structured, I'm going to offer a very narrow set of transactions, that's my goal for financial inclusion. You can do it because today's systems allow you to do that. I mean, today we run about, I would say in these remote corners of India where, in places like Gangtok, for instance, you'd be surprised. Even getting a high quality 128 kbps line is very difficult to run. A very small channel, 4 to 8 Mbps, bits channel for running an ATM. But it is what it is, but people still do transact. Those are the places where you will see 300, 400 withdrawals per day in a transaction. Places like Itanagar, Aizawl, places you probably never go, right? And nobody wants to be the governor of Mizoram. So you can imagine, what's going to be the situation of a common man there. But these places really, really are starved of, financial services. And if you restrict the scope to a very narrow set, then your question is answered. But you say, I want, fancy stuff, I want tablet, I want video, that's left to, Connaught Place and, I would say Colaba and Bombay. That's probably where you have the kind of networks to do video on demand or video with your banker and things like that. So we have to figure out what horse for which course.
And how do you see banks moving in this direction? Are they opting for complete outsourcing? Are they looking at partnerships? Or are they looking at making investments in this space?
Yeah, I think Ravi picked up an important point at the beginning, saying you have two models. You can have the CapEx and you can have the
Right.
OpEx, right? So obviously the benefit of the OpEx model is that the banks don't have to upfront all of this money that they would otherwise invest in productive use, which is in their business. In the 80s and the 90s, there was no choice. You had to put up the money and run your business. But things have changed over time, and today you find increasingly a lot of push towards outsourcing. And I think there's not just the financial reason; there's also a domain expertise that is coming into play. It is no longer about taking one application and sticking it in your data center and managing it. Over a period of time, everything is going to change. There's going to be hardware obsolescence, network dynamics are going to change, software paradigms are going to change. It's not just about one application. Now you have, I don't know of any bank that runs less than 200 applications. So, and probably from 500 vendors, because this vendor got acquired by somebody else and somebody else. So there's also a challenge of expertise. And when you have a running institution like a bank, it's all of those anecdotes, changing the plane when it's in flight, changing the tires of a car when it's in motion. All of those challenges, banks no longer want to be able to do that kind of change management. Say, bring in the experts, it's your problem, let me run the bank, I'll give you SLAs, drive it. India has benefited because as a service industry, we have been doing this for many, many banks through our services contracts that, big IT companies have had with, foreign banks. So we have realized that, hey, here's a model that, we can bring into our own country. Bring in the experts and let them run it for you. And I focus on consumer, I focus on brand, I focus on product, from a banking perspective.
Absolutely. I think the OpEx model is like, one is of course you touched upon the point about domain expertise, and most of us would not have, because it's a very specialized area in a certain application. Second of all, I think even the service providers have realized that an OpEx model sells. This is like buying a car. You want to make an outright purchase or go for an EMI scheme. Again, on a lighter note, is the question of how you want to convince your CFO. So you want to tell him that I want to spend X number of crores in this investment. He will say, thank you so much. What next? Do I offer you, coffee? Can you have a different conversation? But if you tell him that it's going to be more of an OpEx model, and this is going to be the payback, and we can also have we can also subscribe to an enhancement, because technology is changing, by the minute, as to say. So you can also subscribe to further enhancements in the technology. You can look at certain other upgrades. At that point in time, an OpEx model doesn't really kind of pinch, right? Of course, you can capitalize it and then you can amortize it over a period of time. But it's a question of spending the money at that particular space. So I think an OpEx model and with an outsourced environment is the go-to model, according to me. And that's again been our experience as well.
So Ravindra, let me just bring this discussion to your first point. You raised, something about lip service. Are we really making investment? You speak about OpEx model, which is maybe something that you can convince your CFO with. But are we really doing a lip service, or are we really, focusing in this area enough to actually meet some of the objectives? We talk about focus around rural, we talk about SURU, which is semi-urban rural. There are initiatives at the nationwide level, whether it's ATM, point of sale, or BCs, to kind of expand and go to the rural locations, small banks, payment banks, right? But other organizations, and when I say NBFCs, MFIs, and existing banks, are we really making those investments in this space to actually achieve those objectives, or is it purely driven because of some mandates at top?
One is, of course, the regulatory mandates that we keep getting from time to time, which gives us the opportunity to introspect. Some of us, being professionals, want to demonstrate a career for ourselves and also act as a catalyst to ensure that there's a differentiator factor, because all of us want to be different from each other. So to that extent, times have changed. There is, there is a paradigm shift. If you see what happened about 15 years back or 10 years back to what it is today, it is to that extent not so much of a lip service. There are serious thoughts being given by various organizations, be it banks or be it NBFCs for that matter, to invest in technology. The question is investing in the right technology, because by the time you want to implement an application, if it takes about a year and a half, the technology is also becoming obsolete. You have newer technologies and newer solutions, business applications which keep coming all the way. So I think it has to be tied in with the strategic roadmap as far as the organization is concerned. If the organization feels that you need to grow, say for example, we're talking the financial inclusion forum, so if you want to grow your rural portfolio by say 50%, if that is the situation, then how does technology provide that solution to the front line to get that momentum for growth? So times are changing, yes, it has got to be linked to two parts. One is of course the regulations have become tighter, so they've made you introspective. Second of all, you also have a challenge in terms of your operating costs, so you would like to invest in technology and to that extent drive scale in the way you want to operate, so and change the way you want to work. So times have changed, and technology will continue, according to me, the backbone of any change that the organization or the business would drive. And I don't think earlier we had so many amount of outsourced options. We have outsourcing options today. You have various models of restructuring your cost as far as tech is concerned. You have a lot of infrastructure which is made available, a lot of indigenously developed infrastructure applications which are available. You don't have to go necessarily, go overseas to bring those kind of solutions. Most of it is available in the country. So to that extent, yes, to my mind, it's, I think the talk of the lips is changing while, we make forays in the financial inclusion space.
Thank you. So while we're seeing different models of implementation on the OPEX side and as well as on financial inclusion technology front, how are these changes in technologies getting aligned with security aspects each time? Because there have been different waves, right, in terms of the implementation models that banks have adopted. How do the security elements each time get aligned with different technology models, Sanjeev?
See, I think the alignment of security with technology is rather implicit, or I would say it's well defined, if not, because such definition is never done at a local scale. It will always be done at some global context.
Sure.
Where I think still in India we are missing the appreciation of security. The fact that security has to be respected even at the tendering stage.
Yeah.
The fact that the specification must expect a certain level of compliance. It's always price. And this is a change in mindset, and in fact if you go to an OPEX model, to some extent we are eliminated from this problem, because the OPEX vendor, he doesn't have this mindset, because his skin is in the game equally. But where the purchase decision or the technology decision is being made by, I would say, a bureaucrat or a let's say not so knowledgeable person who is driven by, I would say, constraints of guidelines, he has less room to seek security.
Okay.
But technology, as it moves forward, I think the technology movement brings with it the needed security. Now, security itself, the need of security and the security paradigm changes, because you make something secure, or somebody finds a back-end gate to that, and you have to make it more secure. I mean, we see it happening every day in Android and in Microsoft and every technology. So it's not a game that we can play once and the innings is over. You have to play daily, and that's where it comes. Whether do we have the regulatory framework for certification, or making sure that the technology that we use is up to date, up to speed. Does the environment know about the issues and threats, and have they created a feedback mechanism? Let's say a bank is using the SMS for transaction, and there is a fraud using the SMS. I don't want to name the professor. He's an IIT director. His money was, it was in the paper, so you know that even IIT directors can lose money by SMS fraud. So now what has been done against that? So you have to take an action. And it's not that the action cannot be taken, it's a question of who feels responsible to take that action and who is custodian of that space in terms of security and the certification. So I think this answer is not a technological answer.
Okay.
This problem is not to be solved in a technology perspective. It is more an environment, ecosystem and management answer, that for security, whether it is data, transaction, ecosystem, hardware, whatever level, who feels responsible about it, and how do we manage this continuous fight between a fraudster and technology or security. Why did the world move from magstripe to chip and pin? Because fraud will move to the easiest the easiest point. It moves countries. So people, even the US, which is always known to be a laggard on kind of lot of legacy issues, they are now being forced to move from magstripe to chip and pin. Now if the chip and pin is adopted by US, they will become perhaps more difficult to have a fraud, so it will move to another country, perhaps to another space. Internet transactions. Today, we don't see the problem, we are not hearing much about internet fraud, but do you think it will not happen? It will strike. So the question today is that each space is amenable to be hit, because fraudsters are generally more, I would say, ahead of at least, and that's why in some technologies people open challenges and say, okay, come on, this is my technology, find a hole and I'm going to pay you $1 million or $500,000 or whatever else. So I don't have an answer, but the answer is very simple. We need to have a framework that finds it his mandate to check the fact that any transaction that we create is secure.
So let me ask you a little differently. Do you think that for an ATM or a point of sale transaction enabled through a magstripe or a chip and pin card, or any kind of an internet banking transactions, we are a little more mature when it comes to managing risks and security issues compared to a transaction which is being enabled by say a BC or on the mobile wallet, which is just 2-3 years in its operations? Would you tend to agree that we still need to build an evolved framework for risk and security management when it comes to this kind of transactions, which we will be now seeing in the next 4 to 5 years more increasingly, as we have more of those unbanked accounts getting banked, and these transactions on the BC mobile wallet, mobile POS kind of acceptance framework?
Yeah, for sure, because I think the risk increases substantially for a number of reasons. Right. Firstly, the user is less literate, or less aware that losing his 4-digit PIN could mean losing his money, or that he should not put his finger on any terminal that he sees, and without being sure that the terminal is authorized to do a Aadhaar transaction. Now imagine a scenario that I am sitting in a village, I become a BC, even if I'm not, people open bank branches, even if they are not banks. So I could become a BC, I'm not BC. So now the poor villager is thinking that I've got a real nice looking POS machine, it has all the gizmos, you can buy this machine anywhere. And all that machine is doing is collecting fingerprints and PIN numbers or whatever else. So this is not a technology problem. I think the problem is of the framework.
Yeah.
So the villager, perhaps he has a bigger risk because he doesn't understand. We have not educated him well enough. Maybe he will understand once he loses money, but that's an expensive learning
Correct.
process. I have been involved in another government program dealing with health insurance, and you know, the government subsidizes health insurance. It's a very celebrated program, extremely successful. But in some place in a village, you know, people were being enrolled, and you know, it is biometrics and all bells and whistles of security, but his card was being purchased by touts. So his 30,000 rupees a year was being sold by him for 10,000 rupees because he needed money up front. So then I asked that how can he do the transaction, because it is biometrically secured. So they said, well, you know, whenever they want to draw money in the hospital, they call him, and the 10,000 includes 10 visits to the hospital to put his finger and you know, withdraw money. So I mean, you know, ultimately it's a matter of how well we educate the last mile. The BC has to be educated. I think the task is easier to educate the BC because there are less to educate. Educating and that's the real threat, I would say, real challenge of mobile banking.
Absolutely.
When a user is to perform his own banking transactions, then you have to educate 700 million people or 500 million people. That's going to be quite a bit of a challenge. When a BC is serving about 2,000, so you have to, you know, then you have to educate 1 upon 2,000 of that number. But we have still a long way to go to educate BCs.
Yeah. And Ramaswamy, what would be your thought here in a complete outsourcing model? I guess you know, there will be certain operational responsibilities as well that you know, the entity would have while signing up with a bank. And given you know, what Sanjeev just mentioned on education, making aware the BC, making aware the customer through the BC, what has been your experience, and do you kind of agree on this operational hassle that we will have to deal with in years to come?
Yeah, so while I talked about the merits of total outsourcing, what I didn't talk about is for people like us who have started off as technology providers, having had to, you know, take the next step in terms of becoming total outsourced service provider. There's been a big challenge internally to convert yourself from not just being an application provider, but to also provide the ecosystem around it. So now you're dealing with people, process, and technology, and it's at this sort of the intersect that you're talking about. Also putting in the education framework, whatever you call it. So normally people at the bank, like you know, Sanjeev said, most of the people have stitched the back end up, but even there you'd be amazed that there's quite a bit of learning and training that one has to impart to manage systems in a total outsourced environment, saying what's your responsibility versus what's mine, there's certain division of labor. Because all banking functions need to be executed by the bank, right? I'm not going to approve a customer, I'm not going to take decisions on X, Y, Z. Sure, I'll take care of all of your, you know, technology issues, I'll take care of all of your, you know, other process-related aspects in terms of bringing efficiency. So there is that one aspect of training some of the people who run the back-end systems of these banks. It's not like the bank just says, I'm not going to do anything. There is stuff that they need to do. But as you extend it outward and you start talking about whether it's you know, at the last mile, whether it be branches or, you know, technology endpoints like POS machines, ATMs, or business correspondents, then you're talking about a completely different responsibility that then comes on us, which is how do you idiot-proof this, right? I don't want to say that these people are idiots, but at the end of the day, you want to protect yourself from yourself. It's about putting a layer of safety, saying, you know, where should I keep the fire extinguisher so the guy, you know, knows where to go if he makes a mistake. Because one of the things you have to realize in a country like this, and you know, hopefully we are doing that, is that people will make mistakes. And how do you, you know, sort of keep that to the minimum, as minimum possible. And if it does happen, what is your recovery mechanism? So we have to put in a lot of effort to tie things together, which would have been a lot easier if I said, here's the car, here's the steering wheel, here's the ABC, you know, drive it yourself, you crash, it's your problem, right? So here we're giving the car, we're putting the person in the car, we're driving, but also putting enough controls. It's like the guy sits next to you when you're in a learner's license mode. He always has a clutch and a brake that, you know, he stops you from doing something disastrous. So we're having to do some of those when you take on responsibility of being total outsource providers. Lots of small things happen. So you could, for instance, the logistics of enabling RuPay chip and PIN cards if you want to ship it out all over the country. Normally they would say technology provider, you deal with it, right? So we deal with it. Then you deliver it to the last mile, and then the person at the branch says, okay, what do I do now? Do I just give this person? Do I tear off the pin? Do I tell it to him? Do I read it to him? So then you have to put all those process mechanisms in place, saying, hey, there's a logistical issue here. This is what you do. These are the ABCs. You give them a job sheet or a job card. You say that these are the things you do. Why would a technology provider do that? I wouldn't, because I'm a total outsource provider. We also have to write the job cards and protect them from not making the mistake that they would otherwise make, because now they feel that it's not my job anymore. So I think it's that sort of, yes, it's great for the banks, it's good for technology providers to go into a total outsource model, but there are a different set of shifting responsibilities that then have to be adjusted and understood by both sides as to what happens in this model.
Absolutely, because you're shouldering the responsibility with banks
right. And protect each
and
other
protect
from not making the potential mistakes.
So with that, I guess all the panel members, I think it's been a real pleasure and engaging with you on this discussion. But let's now open the floor to the audience here in terms of any questions or any points that they would want to understand from us.
It's the afternoon session.
So was the lunch very interesting, or
Actually, we were very clear about everything that we said.
Okay. We wait for maybe a minute or so and just take questions if there are any on the floor.
Otherwise, we can ask some questions.
Okay. Yeah. Should we move on? Okay. There's a question there.
Like Hema said, was the lunch so interesting that we're still thinking about it? I promise you some great tea. So let's try and make this more interactive, and let's try and engage the panelists now that we have an opportunity to. We have time for a couple of questions, please.
So this is not a specific question, but just an observation. I think the panel has been focusing more on the challenges, but the reality is that technology is the key to financial inclusion, and that it's worked in different countries. It's worked in the Philippines, it's worked in Pakistan, it's working in Africa, and perhaps there are many more lessons for us to learn from these countries to ensure that all the risks and the challenges that we're talking about, how they have been addressed. So maybe it would be great if we could kind of put some more focus on more optimistic, role. I mean, the role of technology for financial inclusion is the key. So I think we didn't kind of talk much about that.
Sure. So, Ramsamy, do you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. Yeah, for a moment I thought we were just going to say that this is not going to work, but I think it works incredibly well. Some of the models that we've seen out of Africa, and we have a couple of large operations in Brazil. We have about 300 million users who run on a prepaid model, slightly different from the model we're discussing here. But extremely successful, and one of the models that I probably think it hasn't taken off in India for whatever reason, probably because of this whole telcos and banks and the regulators and everybody who's getting in between. But it has worked incredibly successfully in terms of facilitating small payments. They put some restrictions around where it can be used, where it cannot, but a huge success. I mean, a country like Brazil, very similar to the kind of challenges that we have, and it rivals when we say 300 million cards, prepaid cards. We're talking about roughly little less than the number of debit cards we have in India. So there is something to be said about those kind of models that they have done there. Thailand, for instance, very successful. Philippines, the example that you talk about. Some of them have, like I said, run on the prepaid model. We have taken a slightly different spin on it in terms of linking it to the bank account. The regulators are a lot stricter here, which is a good thing. But there is something to be said for the positive benefits of what technology can bring. Maybe some shifts are required, in my personal view, in terms of how, possibly the regulators on the telecoms and the bank side sit together and do this. We don't know, because the PPI guidelines are yet to be out, but I'm thinking that a lot of these answers will be there in some of that. So definitely need to be a lot more optimistic. I think it can definitely be solved.
Yeah, I mean, the question was, unfortunately, the panel itself was named challenges. We have to start talking pessimistically, but I can assure you that the industry has all the answers to, let's say, all security risks. There are people who know answers to, at least we think we know all the answers, unless and until a new breach is found, and I'm sure we will, if we find a breach, we will lick or find an answer to that breach as well. But that's the whole game about. The point, I think, and I would like to reiterate just one last time, is that it will do well that all the stakeholders sit together. There has to be an interface which is beyond such a conference, where, for such a big program like, opening 7.5 crore bank accounts or 15 crore bank accounts in 1 year, that an industry participation takes place on a more continual basis, so that the challenges are highlighted. There are many ideas out there. I mean, look at it. I was seeing the MyGov portal, which has just been launched by Mr. Modi, and only on the 6 or 7 broad areas, there are 50,000, 100,000 kind of posts already, and it's just 2 weeks there. So there are a number of ideas. We have to find the way that the ecosystem can talk to each other, talk more together, and then once they decide, we stop discussing further and then go ahead to standardize and make it happen. So we are all optimistic, and that's why we are pretty much sure that one way or the other we will either find a way or make one.
Yeah, I guess the steps have already started with Payments Bank, small bank guidelines coming in. A larger role is expected from non-banking entities as well, because they do realize that the banking framework so far in so many years has been able to achieve what it has so far, and maybe in the next 4-5 years it can only achieve maybe an X percentage. But there is a big vacuum between what it can potentially achieve in the next 5 years and what the government at the central level would want to achieve, which is where telcos, non-banking entities, large conglomerates will actively play a larger role in payments, micropayments in particular, and enable inclusion. So whether it's Brazil or Bangladesh or Africa, there are good examples, but whether it's relevant to India is a big question, which is where the regulatory framework is also changing to lay down the carpet and define what is possible, what is not possible in the country.
We only have time for one more question. Can you pass it on to the gentleman, the last table?
Hi, you just mentioned the payments bank and the small bank in the context of increasing relevance of non-banks in India. Is that really true? Because it appears that to do anything meaningful, you have to be called a bank in India. Right? That's why there's small bank. That's why there's a payments bank. Why not only a PPI?
Sorry? Why not only a?
PPI. Why do you have to be a bank?
Yes.
And you are saying that it appears that with small bank and payment bank circulars coming out, it appears that there's a role for non-banks. I am saying the fact that they're called small bank and the fact that they're called payment bank, doesn't that make them banks? And therefore, what is the role of a non-bank?
So long as you can bank upon them.
Yeah, because the entire objective is to further financial inclusion, right? In 2009, when RBI came up with the guidelines for prepaid instrument issuers, it was exactly to facilitate financial inclusion and enable micropayments, right, for P2P and merchant transactions, right? So since 2009 to 2013, RBI has been witnessing the number of players who've opted for it and their transactions in the market. They do realize that this model is currently facing some challenges. And they've seen successes of these model in different markets in terms of telcos and non-banks playing a larger role, right? Now, given that last year RBI did come up with some guidelines around differentiated banking after the 2 licenses that got issued to the new players, right? So there is a framework which is being built over a period of time which will enable for
financial inclusion objectives. They're very clear. They want Payments Bank to open bank accounts in certain areas. They've clearly defined 25% rural access centers as a mandate for these payment banks. They've defined activities that they can do and cannot do. For example, they're not allowed to do lending, but they only do the basic account opening and transaction facilitation. Small banks can do lendings, which may appeal to NBFCs and MFIs and so on and so forth. So while the Payments Bank and small banks will get added to the banking ecosystem, you're very right in that, but they realize that the mainstream banks, universal banks so far, will only grow at an X percentage to enable financial inclusion. And they are looking at a much larger gap to bridge, which is why these new entities are being enabled through such guidelines.
I hope that answers your questions. Once again, I'd like to thank our panelists and of course our moderator for having joined us. We'll take the questions and one-on-one ahead during the tea break, but may I please request Hema to thank our panelists with a memento.
Sure. Thank you, everyone.
Let's put our hands together. Thank you once again to our panelists.